Forever is supposed to be forever. Seconds are supposed to be seconds. Minutes are supposed to be minutes. Hours are supposed to be hours. Days are supposed to be days. Weeks are supposed to be weeks. Years are supposed to be years. And all of these added up are supposed to consistently build what we call a lifetime. Until death do us part is supposed to be what it means. Until I die. Until we die. Until our last breath together before we enter into eternity. In sickness and in health is more than just physical well-being. It's both good times and bad times. When I feel like it and when I don't. When it feels good and when it doesn't. A promise is supposed to be a promise. It's not meant to be broken. It is your bond, your word. It represents all of who you are. But more than that, it represents all that is holy. It's part of you, but it's also beyond you. In your own finite capacity, as well intentioned as you think you may be, you don't have the dimension or latitude within you to pull off this promise on your own. Not without something infinite, something that is so far beyond you and above you that it must be absolute and unbounded. That thing is so infinitely capable of anything that all impossibilities seem abnormal to its existence. And when all other earthly possibilities end, we realize this immeasurable force is actually not a force, but a person, a creator. The same creator who created the framework for the promises we make, the covenant we enter, marriage, author, God, sustainer, God, refiner, God, redeemer, God, creator of marriage. Wedding bells, honeymoons, and receptions make forever seem so likely. Houses, cars, kids, responsibilities, accountabilities all make forever seem like a reality check that somehow doesn't live up to the euphoria of love at first sight. As time chips away the beautiful vitality of youth and invincibility, mortgages, bills, stress, kids, responsibilities, failed expectations, and dreams began to make forever seem like a burden, a restraint, a prohibition to what was really meant to be my true happiness. Before long, forever becomes my worst enemy, my prison, my cell. If I stay here much longer, I'll never achieve the true happiness that was meant for me. That which once relied on infinite creator for impossibility now uses infinite creator as an excuse for possibilities outside of the covenant that the creator originally purposed. It sounds crazy, but one so infinite would want my happiness, would he not? It's unthinkable that we could have these thoughts, but entirely possible in our human nature if we disconnect ourselves from the words, "What God has joined together, let no one tear apart." Or at the very least, we redefine it to suit our own personal context. When this happens, my new "I want to be happy" self is no longer compatible with my old "till death do us part" self. And this is where I will normalize everything henceforth. The incompatibility will drive me to the unthinkable. But worse yet, the incompatibility will drive me to elevate the pleasure of finite over the promise of infinite. And when we pursue the fading glory of finite, the absence of infinite will slowly introduce experiences into our lives under our noses that we were never supposed to see as normal. Families will be split. Birthdays will never be the same. Vacations will never again be together. Holidays will be split and become competitions for time. But worse yet, children will be thrust into adulthood long before they were ever supposed to. Children will be left standing, looking out windows at the end of driveways, wondering why mommy or daddy isn't coming home, wondering why they spend Christmas in 2 different locations. Innocence will be lost long before it was ever supposed to be lost. Imagination will be suspended. Stuffed animals will become counselors and psychologists. Tear ducts will dry up. Spaces in the heart that were supposed to be filled by covenant and together will be left void or be filled by something else that was never intended to fill that space. Dysfunction will be introduced to adulthood. Societies and cultures will face the same ills and woes, all under the assignment of something other than what it actually really was. A family unit, another family unit, torn apart. Kids are resilient. We'll work together to make it so it's not so bad. Such words will serve as our acquittal for this new normal in life. But they will never take the place of the once promised words of "till death do us part" and "before God." No one ever enters a marriage with that normal in mind, which is why it's never meant to feel normal. Time will carry on. Hurts may or may not be resolved. Forgiveness may break through the shrapnel and the anger. And when we own our own brokenness, in his inconceivable, fierce, never give up on us grace, the Creator will make beauty out of the ashes. He will allow us to pick up the pieces, move forward, and redeem it all, just as he does with everything. All things can and will be made new. But in spite of the beauty of that redemption, there must be the reminder that the forsaking of the words, what God has joined together, let no one tear apart, comes with a grave price of which we will likely never know this side of heaven. The shrapnel spreads far and wide. It leaves wounds deeper than imagined and longer than expected. And that shrapnel blows through generations and cycles of families and is sadly and surprisingly repeated over and over and over again. So, for those still in the fight, for those struggling between the precipice of till death do us part but I just want to be happy. Those still struggling between covenant and compromise. And for those who had their innocence ripped out in spite of the most well-intentioned efforts. For those still shaken by the hurt of a family torn apart. The abdication of the Creator's original promise must never appear to be normalized. The fight is worth it. The plan worth preserving. Even when it's blown apart and the Creator takes the shrapnel and makes something new out of it again. But still, it must never be given the designation of normal. Words I wrote in response to two bookend events that happened to me while on sabbatical this past summer. The first of which happened on Friday, May the 17th of this year. It was the first weekend of my wife and I's, my sabbatical. And we traveled down to Hilton Head to celebrate our anniversary. Because of its proximity to the island, we decided to go over to Savannah, Georgia, for the day. We went over, we were hanging out. We made a post, hey, we're here, yay, all right. We get a text from a mutual friend of ours, hey, we're here too. All right, let us know if you want to get together. And then my wife sees that same mutual friend makes a post that she is in Savannah as well with her boyfriend, soon to be at that time fiance, and now in present day husband. And so my wife naturally goes to like the post and comment on it. And I said to her, we're sitting in a restaurant in Savannah, and I said, wait a minute, what are you doing? She's like, I'm doing what I always do with a Facebook post. And you know what that is if you see my wife's activity on Facebook. I said, you can't like that post. You can't comment on that post. She's like, why not? And thus began our first and only argument during my sabbatical. Now, first of all, so that you understand the context of what I was saying, in my world, just my world, not yours, so this is not me projecting my rules into your world, but in my world, in our world, my wife and I, because of the position that we hold, we don't get to operate by the same social media rules that everyone else does. You have to be really careful about the stuff you like, the stuff you comment on, the stuff you post. Because ultimately, you're pastor to the happily married, the divorced, to the adulterer, to the addicted, to the free, to the Republican, to the Democrat, to the conservative, to the liberal, and on and on and on. So as much as sometimes I want to go, you just have to do nothing and keep your stuff positive and pointed in one direction. We don't get to lay out our shrapnel on social media or comment or make fun of everybody else's shrapnel or get into heated debates as much as we'd love to sometimes. Maybe that'll come one day, I don't know, but it's not today. So we don't get to operate by those same rules. So again, I said, you can't like that post. You can't comment on it. She's like, why not? And there we had this long conversation. Now, the part I didn't tell you, the post of our mutual friend, she was in Savannah with her boyfriend, soon-to-be fiance, now second husband, the guy who she had an adulterous affair with, to leave her first husband of covenant and their 3 boys, who are the same age as mine, behind. And this is the part about Facebook posts like this. See, Facebook posts are so fake because you always see the happy, but you don't ever see the trail that led to the happy or the things that happened all around that. So what nobody ever posts when they say, me and so, we're here having a good time is, but on the way to this, I had an adulterous affair, left my original marriage, and totally dissolved and split apart our marriage, and now my boys forever will be in 2 separate families. Nobody ever posts that. So I said, you can't like that post. If you like the post, you're affirming everything that happened before and that led to the post. Besides the fact, we're also friends with the husband who was left behind. And what about their boys? And I said, it doesn't mean we're not going to be friends with her anymore. It doesn't mean we can't be friends. It doesn't mean we're wishing curses on them and that we still can't pray for them and support and all this stuff. But I said, you can't like that post. We don't get to affirm that. Because it is a tragedy. It's a catastrophe. It's not a celebration. There's a whole other side that has been totally blown up, and nothing will ever be the same. So you can't affirm that. And she came around and she agreed. But she said, so at what point do we get back to normal? And I don't have an answer for that. That's the struggle. Because the new normal was actually never supposed to be the normal. And these are the things we struggle with. And yes, God redeems it all. And He creates a new normal, but it won't be the same as what was supposed to be the normal. And there's always this tension of, I was reminded this week, or I should say more affirmed this week as I was struggling with this message. I was looking for some confirmation, and as if I didn't already had enough, because I did, but call it lack of faith or whatever. But so I read a blog. I was reading a blog this week. It was by a fellow pastor in Charlotte, and the blog was about the assault on families and marriage and just the whole cultural thing, and even stuff that's happening in Europe. It's crazy. And but in the blog, the pastor writes, he refers to this well-known sociologist, Neil Postman, and this part just caught my attention. And I'm just going to say it like he said it. Sociologist Neil Postman once wrote of the disappearance of childhood. His thesis was that children are being robbed of their innocence, their naivete, their ability to even be a child. He contended that in our world, we ask children to embrace mature issues and themes, experiences and issues long before they are ready. Most of us do that because that's what we had to do. It's just generation. And his concern was that the very idea of childhood is that there's a time when a young person is sheltered from certain ideas, experiences, practices, expectations, and knowledge. They are sheltered from adult secrets, particularly sexual ones, kind of like all the ones we're redefining today. He says certain facets of life, its mysteries, contradictions, tragedies, violence, these things are not considered suitable for children to know. Only as a child grows into adulthood should these facets be revealed in ways that the child can assimilate psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. And I read that and I was like, yeah. My wife has a shirt, and man, it is just spot on, sometimes truth. We all feel this way. It's a shirt that says, I can't adult today. Y'all seen this? I mean, we all feel that. There's those moments where you just feel, I cannot be an adult today. I just can't do it. And we are all there, man. But the tragedy in that is, most of the times, when adults refuse to adult, they force their kids to be adults. If you don't adult, you project all that stuff you're not adulting onto your kids to be something they were never supposed to be. And we expose our children, and it's even adult children. I mean, I'm not talking about toddlers. But we expose them to things they were never supposed to be exposed to in all our dysfunction, in all our addiction, in all our parties. When we want to somehow capture the wildness of our youth, every time we make those choices, you bring yourself down, but you're forcing someone who's already there in childhood to go up to where they're never supposed to be. And we do it. I see it even as close as yesterday in sporting events, AAU ball, with parents and their kids on the court, in the field. And we do it in marriage and family. And we wonder why there's so much dysfunction in our culture. And it's easy to blame secularism and somebody else. But it's always as close as right here. I'm convinced. I don't know if God will do this, but if He does, when those who have accepted Him and trusted Him as Savior, and we all get to heaven, and if there's this moment where God says, hey, this thing right here, if you would have just, and if y'all would have just gone instead of, I think if He does that moment, and it's that moment where we go, it'll all come back to one thing. When I said, what God has joined together, let no one tear apart, and y'all started tearing it apart, everything broke. Every single thing broke. Far beyond what we'll ever know. Fast forward 19 days to the other bookend moment. Wednesday, June the 5th. I had been down at the beach for several days by myself in isolation. It was a Wednesday. My family was coming that weekend, and I was finally going to get to see them for the first time in a little while. And they came, and we had like one of the best weekends that we have ever had. It was awesome. And 4 days later, on a Sunday night, at 6 p.m., they were in the car, packed up, and pulling out of the driveway of the house where I was staying and heading up the road to leave. And I was faced with several more days of isolation apart from them. Had this little break where we were together, and then we were separated. In the place where I was staying, there's a long drive up the road, and you go up the road and you turn right to go off the island. And as soon as you turn right, you drive just past a tree line, and then you are out of sight. So we said bye, hugged, kissed, all that kind of stuff. And they got in the car and they drove up that road. And I'm standing in the middle of the road. And they drove up the road. They made the right turn. As soon as they made the right turn, I see the rear window of the car roll down. And my youngest son, Balin, sticks his arm out the window and gives this long, sad bye. And they disappear beyond the tree line. And they are gone. And I'm telling you, it's plain as day. I was standing in the middle of the road, and I began to weep. It was the most surprising, unexpected thing for me. This wave of emotion just, I'm telling you, hit me like a direct punch in the face, and I began to weep. And immediately, as soon as that happened, I realized what had caused that, because in that moment, I felt as strong as I have ever felt God say anything to me. And you got to understand, there were over 100 things that I felt the Lord spoke to me on that I had emailed myself that were just about me. Mark, you need to deal with this. But this one right here was louder and more visible and more felt than all those other 100. And I have no idea why, because I was not dealing, this was really not about me. I was not in a place where my marriage is in trouble or it was completely random yet perfectly specific. And in the moment when I'm standing in the road, I am weeping, I felt God say to me, Mark, this is what it's like. There are too many children, too many spouses left standing at the edge of driveways, left standing in door frames and windows, and they watch mommy or daddy or their spouse drive off for good. And nothing will ever be the same because they're not coming back. And as soon as that happened, there was this moment where I lost where I was. And then I realized I'm in the middle of the road and I'm weeping. And I turn and I walked back inside, and immediately I picked up my Bible and I felt him take me to this passage. Matthew 19, 4-6. Haven't you read, Jesus replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female? And he said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. And I'm telling you as plain as day, the words came to me. Don't normalize this. Don't normalize what you felt in the road. Don't. Families will break, yes. Families will have dysfunction, yes. And when they split, I will pick them up and I will redeem them. But families are not supposed to split. They are not supposed to split. Don't normalize that ever. The word there, let no one separate, is literally no possibility. Like, don't let any possibility, any situation split you. Don't let anything come between you. The only thing that drove me to say these words to you today is the fact that if had I not felt that so profoundly, I wrestled. This one right here is the one I was least looking forward to. Next week will be my last one. But of all the things that I felt God was impressing upon me to say, this was the one. It was like a Jonah moment. I was like, God, I'm not going to say that. I don't win. Nobody wins with this. There's no way I get out of this unscathed if I say that. But he would not let me get away from it. So there was one point where I really just said, okay, I'm going to say this, but God, when I'm done, I'm just going to say, okay, message delivered. That's it. You can do with it what you want. And I will have done my part. But I want to go back to the end of the blog I read this week. And note, it's this week, the week I was saying to God, I'm not going to say this. I have plenty of other things I can share that are way more jovial than this. He would not let me escape. So I go back to the blog. And at the very end of the blog, It closes with these words, and I'll leave you with these. The pastor writes, I am reminded of the confession of Martin Niemöller, who was a pastor in Germany prior to World War II. Niemöller originally sent Hitler a telegram. This is a pastor. He sent Hitler a telegram congratulating him on his rise to power because he had no idea. He had no idea. He knew something was happening. He had no idea. Later, when everything broke loose and he saw the truth, he reflected on his political naivete and hesitation to speak. And he wrote these words. In Germany, they came first for the communists. And I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews. But I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me. And by that time, no one was left to speak up. So I think the most appropriate way for me to deliver the ending of what I felt that day to you is to simply say, the enemy is coming for our families. Because he is, the culture is coming for your family. Society is coming for your family. And there is a direct assault on your marriage and your family and your children. Consider the words of this one dude who stood up and spoke up and simply asked you to fight. So where to leave you with a response today? Some of you might be here today and you're not married and you're in a relationship and you're living together and you're sleeping together and it's just all good because that's what everybody does. My prayer today for you is that if you're the guy, you would man up and ask that girl to be your wife. If you're the girl, my prayer for you today is that you would know that your purity is worth way more than what you're giving away. And so are you. If you're here today and you've encountered the brokenness of a family, divorce, and God redeemed all of that, nothing will ever be the same. But what's done is done. The only thing you have is what's moving forward. And my prayer is that wherever you are, start there and get to this altar and thank God for picking up the pieces. for putting scabs over the shrapnel that enable you to move forward and commit what's forward, what's left of it, to Him. And fight for what you have. And finally, if you're in a marriage and you're happy, thank God for that. Because over half the people in this nation, statistically, are not where you are. And don't assume that you're always going to be that way. So my hope would be for you that you would make an altar where you are, or you would come to this altar and commit to the fight, no matter what. And lastly, if you're in that spot, that marriage, and you're between the precipice of, but I just want to be happy, and till death do us part. Hold on. Hold on. Get in the fight. Whether you make this your altar today, or you make an altar where you are, I pray that every single person in this room is either thanking God, going to your knees, and praying for the fight for you and those you know.